Well, a warm welcome to our first in our series of our ISP Educational Talks for 2022. It's lovely that you're here and we're absolutely delighted that you are going to be here. Natasha, if you could just go back to the first slide, that'd be fantastic. As a parent, you play a key role in your child's learning, and though you receive reports and progress reports from school, how do you actually know if your child is learning each day? Well, in our session today, we're going to be finding out the key questions to ask our children and, more importantly, the answers to look for. We will also be looking into some key research that will give you a real insight in how you can support your child or your children. Thanks, Natasha. So let's introduce ourselves. My name is Fiona Lee-Allen. I joined ISP in 2018 and I was the principal at the British School of Malaga in Spain. Previous to that, I'd been working good 30 years in UK education. And in the last year, I've taken on the fantastic job of being the Director of Learning for Europe and Iberia. And part of my role is supporting heads and senior leadership teams, working in school alongside teachers and looking at how, as teachers, we can reflect on our practice and how we can ensure our children are learning to the very best of their capabilities. Natasha.
Hi everybody, I'm so glad you could make it this morning. I'm Fiona's deputy. I work in Iberia, principally with the Spanish-speaking schools, supporting them the same way as Fiona to make sure that our students are learning, sharing best practice and supporting staff and students. Laura.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Laura Oran, and I'm the head of the primary years program at Internacional Aravaca School in Madrid. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha and Laura. Now, today, I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions to ask. You know, I'm a parent, I've got two boys in my 20s, and I'm still asking myself, am I doing the right things with my children? Am I asking the right questions? And actually, what we would like you to do is, if you can, write any questions in the chat. And what we'll do is we'll look at those questions at the end. I hope you're okay with that. So please use that chat. Hopefully you've found where the chat is. But here's a breakdown of what our session today looks like. So our sessions is broken up into three areas. So we're going to be focusing on what is learning. You know, how do our children feel when they're learning? What does learning look like? Then we're going to move on to some research, which looks at how we can develop a growth mindset in our children. And that's not just for parents, that's also for school teachers as well. And then we're going to be focusing on some really key questions. We're calling it our three big questions that will allow you to have a really good understanding of how your child is learning on a day-to-day basis.
But before we get started proper, I'd like to take a quick poll about your general views about learning. So there is a link in the chat. All you need to do is click on it and you'll be taken to this poll. You need to skip over a couple of screens and then it will allow you to answer. What you've got to do is choose which of these statements are true about learning, and I'll give you a hint, there's more than one. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to do that.
It's completely anonymous, so please don't worry if you're thinking I'm not sure. You'll be learning as well. That's all good stuff. Okay.
Just give you a minute or two. Oh, excellent. Six people have taken the plunge. Thank you very much. Excellent. Right, let's have a quick look at how these responses are panning out. You can still keep voting, it's live. Oh, wow, B, E, and F are winning by a mile, F particularly. Excellent. So actually, I would totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. So I'm glad that we've got people on the call that share our views about learning before we even start. That's excellent. So we're going to hop back to the presentation now. Thanks very much for participating. So let's move on to our first proper section, which is what is learning. Now, to talk about learning, we need to talk a bit about the brain, because the brain is obviously where our learning happens. And what we really need to bear in mind when we're thinking about learning, or we're thinking about learning a new skill, or learning in schools particularly, is that our frontal lobe holds new information in our short-term memory for only 15 to 20 seconds. And then if it doesn't feel that it's important, it forgets it. If it feels it's important, it's indexed and organized and can then be used later. But if the brain doesn't feel that this information is important, it goes away. So if you imagine that you're sitting in a lesson, you'll go back a few years to when you're at school, some information will come in to your brain via the teacher, via a book, via a website, and your brain will decide which is the important information. In this case, my brain has decided that the important piece of information is the pink one. The yellow and the blue doesn't think it's important, so they get forgotten immediately. What then happens is this information is indexed and organized. And if we practice it a lot, we can then start making connections to other pieces of information and other skills in our brains, which is really, really important. And it takes practice. So it doesn't matter if initially our brains consider a piece of information to be important. If we don't practice it, if we don't use the skill, if we don't retrieve the information, it gets forgotten. So that's why we always need to come back to what we've learned. We need to practice these skills. And then that's how they get really embedded in our brains. And those connections are really, really important, because it doesn't matter how many neurons we have in our brains, those pathways that make up the scaffolding in our brains that really show what we know. It is the connections that make us really intelligent. So that practice and that retrieval is what's really, really going to help us as adults and your children, the students, to learn really effectively.
So now we're going to watch a short 3-minute film from our very own ISP Learning Hub. It's a platform which is our go-to place. It is a place where we share good practice. And as teachers, we have the opportunity to reflect and to get better. And here at ISP, we have a dedicated learning and innovation team that is led by Emily Porter, who's our group director. And you will see Emily talk to us about what we believe learning to be. Thanks, Natasha.
Across ISP and in all our schools, learners and learning come first. That's because learning is the only all-purpose future-proof skill there is, and it's something that we can all get better at. But what exactly do we mean by learning? First of all, learning is a process. We often talk about learning as a single event or moment. I might ask my daughters, what did you learn at school today? Or you might ask a friend what they learned on a course or in a class. But learning is a continuous process that evolves over time, moving us from simple surface knowledge and skills to complex, deep understanding. If that sounds like hard work, it is. And if you want to learn something new, it requires deliberate effort, energy, and time. For these reasons, learning can feel like a struggle. We'll come back to this later. So if learning is a process, what is it the process of exactly? In our schools and across ISP, when we talk about learning, we mean the process of getting better in our knowledge, skills, and understanding through deliberate, repeated experiences. The process of learning is a process of growth, closing the gap between where we are now and where we hope to be in the future. Imagine you wanted to swim but you never learned how. The learning gap between where you are now, someone who can't swim yet, and where you want to be, someone who can swim a length, cannot be achieved in a single lesson. Bridging this gap involves repeated experiences of steps that will move you towards the end goal. First, you need to learn how to feel safe in the water, how to kick your legs using supports, how to breathe, how to coordinate your arm movements, and so on. Gradually, through repeated experiences and practice, you bring your knowledge and skills together, take off the supports or the floaties, and feel the pleasure and independence of that first glide through the water as you swim your first length. But it's not just the repetition of experiences that is important. The kinds of experiences we have affect whether the struggle of learning is good or bad. Imagine learning how to swim with a knowledgeable, supportive, learning-focused coach. This kind of repeated experience, even if it feels difficult and challenging at times, will most likely be positive and result in improvement. When we experience learning like this, we get a positive sensation of success and of moving towards our goals and desired outcomes. We want to learn. This is what we call a good struggle, and it is a sensation that we can learn to love. Now imagine learning to swim with a critical and patient coach, or a coach who isn't clear about the steps you need to bridge your learning gap. You might still end up swimming, but the experience will probably feel confusing, stressful, and overwhelming. This creates an unnecessary bad struggle, and a bad struggle can make us want to stop learning or make learning harder than it actually is. In a bad struggle, we can end up wanting to quit or give up altogether, and that's a sensation that can cause us to avoid learning in the future. Fortunately for us, there are now decades of scientific research about the knowledge and understanding of the process of learning. And the good news is that applying what we know through the experiences we offer, everyone can get better at leading their own process of learning. And the exciting thing is, this skill of metacognition, learning to learn, has the power to positively transform our lives.
So before we actually move on, let's think about some key takeaways from that film. So learning is a process. It's not just something that we're able to do instantly. We have to engage in repeated experiences, and children will understand that as practice. And that's so important, as Natasha was talking about before, about making those connections in the brain. It's only through repeated experiences and continual practice that those connections can be formed and that the actual understanding can be embedded. And during that process, students will engage in what we call a good struggle. So they're having to think hard, they might be making mistakes, they're beginning to consolidate their learning and then hopefully beginning to apply it into new contexts. So all of this requires effort and requires time. And like I said at the beginning, all of our children are different and they all require different amounts of time and they all require different amounts of effort. So Laura, before we move on, I'm really interested to know from a primary background, obviously in secondary, it might be easier to identify when children are engaged in a good struggle. So at your school, how do you get the younger students to understand what learning feels like?
Well, we've been working on changing the culture of learning by trying to make our students aware of the process, as Emily Porter said in the video, and not the outcome. In primary, they are very used to doing different thinking routines before, during, and after the activities, which help them focus on their learning. At the end of each lesson too, we also try to ask them learning questions such as, what do you know now that you didn't know before? Or questions like, what did you find difficult today? And these questions make them reflect on their learning. When they apply their communication skills or social skills, self-management skills that we work on from the early years, they also see how they are improving. How is this process going? So this also helps them recognize their learning in a very, very positive way. And when we talk about the early years, that it could seem a bit more difficult for them to recognize when learning is happening. But as you know, if you see them while they're in the playground, when they are playing, when they are focusing, and you focus on what they are saying, you can clearly know whether they are learning or not.
Great. Sounds like reflection is really key at your school to get those children to be able to understand what they're doing and how they can get better. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we're going to move on. We'll hear from Laura a little bit later. One of the things that I referred to at the beginning was important research, and Emily talks about this. And actually, it's really supported education in the last 30 odd years. There's an incredible Canadian psychologist called Carol Dweck, and she conducted a huge amount of research. Talking to lots and lots and lots of schools and children, mainly in Canada, but then that grew. And she was looking at the attitude that children have when it comes to learning. And what she came up with, she clearly identified that the attitudes to learning really impact on whether you are a child which demonstrates a growth mindset, which is very much focused on growth, or a fixed mindset. So as teachers, we want to make sure, and as parents, we want to develop children with growth mindset. So let's go to the next slide. So by focusing on the outcome that Laura just referred to, it often indicates that somebody may well be just presenting as a fixed mindset. So what does that fixed mindset look like? It means that people who have got a fixed mindset very much focus on the outcome. They believe that their intelligence is completely fixed, that they're born with it, and that they have an innate amount of it, and that little can change that amount of intelligence because they feel it's fixed. So if we look at the middle section, you'll see that often those children don't like being challenged. They see failure as a complete reflection on their limit of their abilities. They feel that they're either good at something or they're not, and they're very kind of shut down about it. Often when they feel frustrated when they're learning, they give up. They tend to get very frustrated and they can't pick themselves up because their attitude to learning is so fixed. And on the right, you'll see some kind of indication that a child might present as that. So, oh, I did really well on that test because I'm clever. So they're focused on their intelligence rather than the time and effort they've put in. And again, I'm no good at maths, which is why I got all the fractions wrong. So they're telling themselves, because they're not intelligent enough, that is why they have not they've not made enough progress. So focusing on the outcome can be quite disastrous on occasions. We know that having an outcome is clearly the opening to many doors when we leave school, but focusing on the process is really important. So when we look at focusing on the process, this very much indicates a growth mindset. And what that looks like is people or children who present as having a growth mindset, they don't feel that intelligence is fixed. They recognize that through effort and determination and time, their intelligence will grow. They know that they through getting better by putting in extra work, they will eventually at some point get better. And those indicators are children and young and people and adults. Let's not forget, it's not just something that happens with young people. When people and young people get something wrong, they see it as an opportunity to grow. So they will sit and reflect, just like Lara was saying that they're trying to develop at their school, which is just fantastic. They are happy to try new things. They're not worried about failing because they know that through failure, they learn. And you'll often find that they like challenges, they respond very well to constructive feedback, and they are inspired by the success of others. And the kind of comments that might indicate that you've got somebody who has got a growth mindset is, I did really well on that test because I worked hard. Focusing, therefore, you can see on the effort and the time. I got all the fractions and questions wrong, but I understand why. And next time, I will not make the same mistakes again. So Laura, one of the things that I'm really keen to hear about is how do you actually, in early years or in primary, identify when a young child may present as having a fixed mindset? And what examples do you hear from primary children who present like that?
Okay, I would say it's very clear for us to identify when primary students are presenting a fixed mindset. Comments like, this is very hard, I can't do it, or why do I have to do it better if this is already okay? Or I'm not good at writing, so I will never improve. This kind of behavior, I think they appear very regularly on some students. And our aim as teachers is to recognize them as quickly as we can, to bring them back to a more positive outlook, a position which helps them understand that learning is possible for everyone. Struggling is what will make them learn and improve, and finding things difficult will help them grow.
Yeah, because often the word struggle indicates a negative thing. But in this context, when we talk about children being engaged in a good struggle, it's their brains having to work and to think really hard. And that's when we know they're learning. What strategies do you use or your school teachers use at your school in Arivaca that allows children to move from a fixed to a growth mindset? What kind of strategies do you use?
Well, we normally spend time with the students and revisit previous work which demonstrated that they could do it, explaining to them that we have seen you doing this before. Yeah. And of course, our main strategy when they say, I can't do this, is explaining to them that maybe they can't do it yet. And the word yet has to impact them. And our goal is for them to believe that with hard work, they can improve in any area where they are struggling in.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Thanks, Natasha. So as Laura talked, Natasha and I also feel very passionate about this whole notion of I believe in the power of yet. And if we can just give you some examples. So for instance, if a child presents as I can't do this, as a parent or as a teacher, we say, you can't do this, yet. Or another example being, it doesn't work, they're feeling quite fixed, they're negative, it doesn't work yet. You know, coming back to them, getting them to think about the process of learning, that they need to put more effort and more time in. This doesn't make sense yet. And I can't do maths yet. And finally, I don't understand this yet. So the power of yet is really, really important. And it's a really simple 3-letter word that we just need to get used to using. On the next 2 slides, I'm just going to walk you through some of the things that we often hear children saying, and some of the things that you as a parent might be able to support your child with. On the left, you will see some examples, and we'll go through one by one, of what a child might say. So a child might say, I cannot learn now, it is just too hard. As a parent, you might say one of the things in the middle, lighter green arrow, and you might say, okay, I know you find this hard, so stop and do something else. Because as a parent, you kind of don't want your children to be feeling negative. You might say, just stop doing this and go and focus. And clearly there are times when that might be necessary, but if your child is presenting as fixed, actually just telling them to give up is not necessarily the best thing. So what you might need to think about is the darker green section. So you can learn whatever you want or need to give yourself, you need to give yourself time and be patient. So it's focusing, getting them to focus their brain on the fact that learning is a process. And the next one, so there's no point in trying if I'm going to fail. You know, a child who's got fixed mindset is not going to want to experience those horrible negative feelings because they feel really bad, especially if they're comparing themselves to others. So as a parent, you might say, okay, then don't put yourself under this pressure, but actually, what would be better if you're trying to move them into a growth mindset might be, look, try and see failures as opportunities to learn, to reassess and to do better next time. Now, we know that your language might change for somebody in primary. You might feel this is more for an older child. If it was for a younger child, you might say, okay, you know, getting things wrong is uncomfortable. But, you know, when you think about what you've got wrong, you might actually be able to learn how you can do it better next time. So you can see how I'm tweaking my language to help make the child recognise that actually more effort, learning is a process, is going to take longer. And the next one. So again, a child might say, I'm always struggling with this, you know, always. And if you were to say, I know you've always really found this difficult, if you actually tell them that you recognise this, again, it's kind of confirming to them that they are struggling. Whereas it might be better for you to focus on, look, you can always do better at something, but only if you put in effort. So again, it's the use of language, it's focusing on repeated experiences, practicing time and effort. So let's look at just 3 more. So another one that could be, I'm not as clever as others and I feel intimidated by their success. I, as a parent, used to get this from my sons. They used to be comparing themselves to other children in the class. And if I was to have said to my son, look, your brother had the same issues, they got it in the end. Again, you're making those direct comparisons. You might feel like you're reassuring them, but actually what you need to kind of say is, look, when you see others succeed, tell yourself that you can also achieve this at some point. So you can see you're kind of having to force them to think positively and think about the future. Growth mindset development. Next one. So I can't make this any better. It is what it is. They're kind of giving up. And so again, if you were to say something like, okay, if you think that is all you can do, then just hand it in. You're kind of, again, agreeing to them that maybe they're not giving themselves the opportunity to do the reflection, to think about how they can make it better. You know, have a conversation with them about what is it that you don't think you're getting right here. Let's talk it through. So again, something that we might advise you to say is, what could you have done better and how can you learn from this? Again, getting the student to reflect. And often you'll find that when they start to do that reflection, like Laura says, they'll then begin to recognise that actually there are things that they can do to get better. And our final one is a child who says, I've always been told that I can't. And again, you know, if you at a parents' evening have heard that from your teacher, please kind of challenge them in a nice, positive way, because by you saying, if your teacher says you can't do it, then you can't do it, is clearly not the right thing to say. Instead, no one knows your potential, only yourself. You must discover it for yourself. So I'm hoping that those examples have allowed you to reflect as a parent yourself on the types of things. When I first heard all of this research, my boys are in the mid-20s, it certainly made me think about things. You know, when they did really well in a test, I would never ever say, well done, you're so clever. You might think that's a nice thing to do, but you know, well done. You've put in loads of work, you deserve that success. Okay, thanks, Natasha. So learning, as we say, it's requiring deliberate effort and energy and time. We know that learning can feel a struggle, and that is something that you need to tell your children. You know, when they're feeling like they're having a struggle, say, yes, it is, because your brain's working hard. You're really having to think. You are learning.
And now finally, our big three questions, because you saw in the previous section with Fiona what you might say if your child presents with a fixed mindset. What about your child comes home from school? You want to know how their day's gone. And often, as Emily Porter said in the video, if you just say, what did you learn today? Or what did you do today? You get, particularly if they're teenagers, a very short one-word answer or something that you aren't interested in, like the games they played in the playground or what they had for lunch. So what should we be asking children when they get home from school that can start a really good conversation about learning and allow you as parents to see what they're interested in and how they've engaged? So the first one, Lara mentioned, what do you know today that you didn't know yesterday? Now, we like this question because it focuses on knowledge acquisition. It allows you to know which information got past your child's short-term memory and into their hippocampus, so we know what their brains have considered important. And it also allows you to know what your child has found interesting, because the first things they're going to tell you are the things that they're most interested in. And again, it's a great conversation starter, that. Also, what did you find difficult today? Now, this is great because it focuses on our idea of good struggle and the fact that you have to find things a bit difficult and have a good struggle to make the learning stick, okay? It allows your child to know that you feel it's important to find things hard and it's okay to find things hard. And it also allows you to know how your child deals with difficulty. Do they just give up, in which case they might have a bit of a fixed mindset and you might need to support them along with the school to move on from this? Or do they really keep trying, use the resources available and work their way around it, go through that good struggle and learn really effectively? But actually, you do want to know, as well as what they find difficult and what they find interesting, what they're supposed to be learning. So Laura, can you just explain a bit how you support parents with their understanding of the basics of their child's learning at your school?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said at the beginning, we're trying to create a culture of learning by trying to make students aware of this process and not the outcome, not only students, but parents too. Now we have a specific report card, which focuses on the level of progress in regards to different skills and knowledge. And this progress is not measured with a numerical grade. So not only students, but parents need to focus on something different to what they were used to. And this, I can say that this is a huge change for them. The most important part of this report card is the teacher's comments, where they reflect on the level of progress of the students and add an area where students need to improve. So a change of language that I think Fiona said before, a change of language when we talk about learning at school and at home, I think it's essential. A change of structure in our parents' evenings and a different way of helping our children is essential to change this culture. And something really, really, really important, I think you're going to agree, Fiona and Natasha, when your children ask you for help at home, please don't do it for them.
Yes, absolutely. Because of course, if they know that whenever they ask you for help, you'll do it for them, it becomes your homework as a parent and not their homework as a child. And also you want them to have that good struggle. So why would you help? Why would you do it for them? Maybe guide them a bit. But I read something on Facebook this morning, a great teacher, and that you as parents are fully part of their education, doesn't tell a child what to see, they tell them where to look. And I think that if you keep that in mind for your child's homework, tell them where to look, but don't tell them what to see, you can help them have that growth mindset and experience that good struggle. So on to the last and my favorite one. Did you ask a good question today? Obviously, it allows you to know if your child has been engaged with their learning, because they're only going to ask questions if they're engaged and they want to get better and they want to make connections. And it's those connections, as we know, that are the things that make us really smart. And it's expressed, this idea of asking a good question and how important it is expressed by Isidore Isaac Rabi, who won the Nobel Prize for his work in magnetic resonance imaging, and he's basically the father of the MRI machine. And he said, "My mother made me a scientist without ever intending to. Every other Jewish mother in Brooklyn would ask her child after school, 'So, did you learn anything today?' And that hasn't changed now. We're 80 years on and parents are still asking that question. But not my mother. Izzy, she would say, 'Did you ask a good question today?' That difference, asking good questions, made me become a scientist." So let's think about those good questions today.
Well, we hope you have found our presentation informative, and just as a kind of a wrap up before we ask any questions, and please feel free to use the chat to ask any questions, some of the key takeaways are, encourage your child that learning is a process, and if they're engaged and if they're putting in the time and effort, they will recognise that a good struggle is when they're actually really, really learning. Making sure that they understand and encourage them that practicing, even though they might find it a little bit tedious, that is helping their brain to make those connections, really, really important. And as parents, we hope that maybe you've taken something away, maybe it's reflected on your use of language and how you interact with your child. And instead of, just focusing on those fixed mindset questions, think about how you can develop your child and kind of move them into a growth mindset. You may already have a child who presents as growth mindset, but it'd be really interesting for you to do some reflection yourself. Well, we really, really have enjoyed being able to do this share with you today. If you do have any questions, we haven't got any so far. We've just got a couple of very nice positive comments, so thank you so much. If there's anything that you wish to know more about, even if you don't get the opportunity during this presentation, we would be very happy to take any questions. We've been asked about sharing the presentation. Yes, we are sure that we will be able to share the presentation with you. I'm sure that will be fine. Thank you again. We've had lots of really lovely positive comments that they found it really useful and helpful. This is obviously the very first in our series, and we're going to be doing these every month. Our next one on the 29th of March will be focusing on how we encourage and adopt a healthy well-being and within our schools, and what we can do as parents in doing that at home. We're also going to be looking at how in our schools we're developing children to be specialised and to be entrepreneurs. So look out for our exciting ISP educational series. Really, really important that we get people to come along. Not only are we telling you what's going on in schools, we want to be transparent, but hopefully if you're not already a parent of a child in an ISP school, it gives you a really good idea about the fantastic things that here at ISP we do. So I think I will wrap up because I don't think we've got any questions, which makes me feel that maybe we've addressed everything that you've asked for. You will be sent a very short one-question survey that you'll receive by the end of the day. Any feedback that you have, anything that you feel we could improve this, we're very reflective. We're hopefully developing and championing growth mindset people as well. So we take that feedback really seriously. So it takes me just to say goodbye. So Lara, if you just want to say goodbye, Natasha.
Thank you very much for coming. It's been great to be able to do this presentation. I'm glad to see that you've got something out of it.
Totally. Thank you very much for coming. It's been a pleasure to be here with you, joining Fiona and Natasha. So thank you.
Take care, everyone. See you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.